was producing more money. That's why they were called bourgeois. The word bourgeois is a French word which in 17th century, actually in France, it meant those who work and get paid. But the bourgeois and the bourgeois class used by Karl Marx has different meaning. It refers to the exploiting middle class, new emerged middle class. Politically, still the kings in England, of course, in power, but now also the commoners had a place in the European Parliament as well. More people, ordinary people, specifically those who belong to the middle class, could get into the parliament, so they could make their voice being heard. In the second half of the 19th century, aside from Marx and his ideas on capitalism, positivism emerged as an important phenomenon to explain a natural and social relationship. People loved the new invention, such as photography, electric bulb, telephone, and so forth. In positivism, everything should be proved in order to be accepted. Positivism, which glorified the new inventions, was the value and asset of the day, meaning that reality can be observed through laboratory investigation and through the five senses: visual, tactile, olfactory, auditorial, and gustatory. Only through these five senses. If they are observed by these senses, it is a reality. If not, it cannot be considered real, or it should be proved in laboratories. Otherwise, it cannot be accepted. That kind of observation could be pinpointed as the pure truth, which gave people a relief and a nice feeling, because they had something to stick on, and they were sure that since it is being proved by science, so it is acceptable. It gives them a kind of assurance for their beliefs. At the same time, sociology gained strength through the ideas of Auguste Comte, who claimed, just as we could find truth in experimenting science, we could do this in society. He said we could study the effect of environment on the destiny of an individual, family, or a society. Auguste Comte is a German philosopher of the 18th and 19th century. Next came Darwin in the 19th century, who lived from 1802 to 1882, with his very important book, Origin of a Species, in which he meant natural selection, survival of the fittest. He also dealt with the belief in metaphysical power. So this natural selection and survival of the fittest, actually moved in line with Karl Marx ideas, because it gave power to the middle class and upper middle class, and also the bourgeois class. They said, we have the money, so we are the more powerful. So that's why we survive, and the rest of the people should die. Then came the idea of fate and destiny, For Greek, the gods, uh, I mean mythological gods with a small g, determined, not the God Almighty, gods, determined the destiny. So in Greek mythology, the destiny is made by the wish of gods, as we can see in Iliad and Odysseus. Later, Sophocles mentioned that will determined the destiny. In his trilogy, three plays, started with Oedipus Rex, Antigone, and Oedipus in Thebe and Antigone. He shows this destiny, which is realism emerged then as a movement which investigated how man's fate was determined by environment, economy, and heredity, posed by Darwin, Marx, and Comte, Auguste Comte. This kind of focalization triggered a new theater, so new rules were adapted from the point of view of the playwright. The most important thing was to show reality and nothing else on the stage, only reality, the reality that takes place in the real world. So the historical drama was abandoned. Historical stuff was the need of romanticism, but with realism, reality couldn't go back in time. Why? Because they wanted to show the reality of the life that they are living in the status quo. Shakespeare historical plays were not also accepted. They belong to the past. The plays had to deal with the contemporary events. The language of drama should be contemporary, as the day of the presentation, at exactly the same time that they are presenting. For example, if it is 18th century, they should use the language of the 18th century people. If it is in 19th century, it should present the people the language of the 19th century people, because because of the nature, the generative nature of the language, which changes. through the course of history. So it should change. Although the costumes should be the same of the current fashion. The clothes that the actors used to wear should be very similar to the clothes that is worn by ordinary people who lived in the same time. It should not be different. The issues discussed should be the issues of the day. So everything was getting afresh, representing the same things that we could see and experience in everyday life around ourselves. Although being true to life had already started with romantic melodrama in which real dogs, um, cocks, and hens used to came to the stage. When they were talking about dogs, the real dog appeared on the stage. Or if there was a cock um, singing, or they were talking about hens, they were present there on the stage. Because the stage was so real that it seems that the audience actually are experiencing the very tangible experience that they have outside of the theater. Yet with realism as a new wave, the illusions of realistic places and items were not so free. If you were showing an event happening in a room, you should show exactly that room. As I have given an example when we were dealing with George Bernard Shaw. He was very exact with all the details that should contain in a room if or in the street if the play was taking place there. The type of a carpet, the color of the chairs, the type of chairs, table, mantelpiece, even the drawings on the wall should clearly show who has drawn them, to what time they belong to, what actually a style they were, or what kind of a school they were following, whether it is a symbolist or a realist or whatsoever, ancient. Everything should be in detail, which is called fourth wall conventions. Remember, we have discussed this in the previous session. The stage was made of 3 walls. You couldn't even cough not to disturb the private life of that room as an audience, of course. The lightning, the period of the day, whether it is morning, evening, night, the seasons were adjusted by light as exact as possible. Well, the improvement in the science and the appearance of the lamps and electricity gave this opportunity to use lightning, because at the time of Shakespeare, for example, they did not have lightning effects, or at the time of the ancient Greece, they didn't have any light, source of lights. So that's why Aristotle mentions that a play, when it starts, it should end in the same day. So if the weather gets dark, or if it start to rain, or these kind of things, they should leave and come back again and continue in the same situation. So they could not make any distinction between the seasons or part of the day by lightning. It was within these new theatrical conventions that the modern writers emerged. The major one was Ibsen, who in his first period was romantic and later changed into realist. Strindberg, who in his first period was a realist and changed later, form of his realism has changed. And Antoine Chekhov, who was always a realist, never a romantic, and never changed his style of realism. These are the three playwrights that we are going to consider. Actually, today we were going to consider The Ghost by Henrik Ibsen. I'm afraid it was not possible, maybe later. So next week, actually we should have two presentations. Samra Jasem and Ebtesam Jasem, please prepare yourself for your presentation for next week about Strindberg, father, but if you have time and if the microphone start working, we will also consider Ibsen as well, okay? Mortada, let me activate your... Okay, you are activated again. See if it works. But it seems that it does not. My God, it doesn't work. This is crazy. And really... Okay, Abtaj. Let me see. Okay, Abtaj, now I have opened your microphone. Hope it works. Matters more scientifically, insisting on the factors of heredity and determinism. Naturalistic drama stressed on poor people, physical and no moral deficiencies. Language was vulgar, no plot, and no traditional and cooked up. No well-made melodrama, no villain and virtuous characters, neutral. Plot was more important than sorry, the characters were more important than plots, opposite to what uh, Aristotle used to say, that plot is most important factor in a play. And they played, actually, they pay attention to the characters also. They did not get the side of the characters because they were completely detached from their texts. They did not show any affection toward the characters or anything happened in the story because they only wanted to show, as Emile Zola said, we take a problem from a society and put it on the bed of a laboratory and try to open it up in order to show the problem as it is to the viewers, to the readers. Basically, the plot formation makes drama of Ibsen, Strindberg, and Chekhov different from Emile Zola, who saw theater, a slice of life, as their motto, and tried to show the nakedness of the human soul, because they very much insisted on the three kind of heredity: biological heredity, sociological heredity, economical heredity, and historical heredity. Determinism, sorry. Biological determinism is that if when you are going to born, you don't know whether you are a boy or a girl, and you do not have any decision on whether you like to be a boy or a girl when you are born. So this is deterministic. Social determinism refers to the family that you are born, and all of us born. We do not choose our family, whether they are socially well off, rich, and they have lots of money, or they are poor, they belong to the middle class, whether they have home or car or job, and these kind of things, we don't know. We are just born into that family. Whether the family that you are born in have a father who is a boss in a bank, or is a professor at a university, or is a driver, bus driver, or is a militant, or whatsoever, no one knows. They just happen. Whether you are born in a poor family, rich family, middle class family, is a kind of deterministic destination. Cannot change it. Well, mostly naturalists believe that they try very hard. The characters in their stories try very hard to change their destination. Even if they are not successful, that mostly they are not, but their effort is precious. Their effort is somehow appreciated or should be appreciated. It shows that they have dignity, and their dignity is very much appreciated. Chekhov is somehow naturalist because of lack of plot, but in Ibsen it's very difficult to see naturalism, except the slight presence of heredity and environment. Not harshly, not perfectly, but just slices of. Okay, let's try Ebtaj next week again. If we had a chance and everything went perfect with your microphone, you can present it next week first, and then we will move to our second presentation. Okay? Well, Murtada, you can do this, but I don't think that since the classes are being checked by the authorities, when they check and see that there is a PowerPoint here, but there is no voice on it, you see, and it is not moving, so they think that, so what activity has been done in the class? Um, well, Ebtaj, the holidays started from the week after next week, okay? So next week is our last week. And then the week after, you will be on holiday for 3 weeks, okay? Up to the 14th of um, Farvardin. I think is in April. Okay. So Maya will tell you exact date in Arabic, okay, equivalent in Arabic. Compared to romanticism, realism is pessimistic. The individual has no positive thing to think about. A realistic character has a sense of morality. She or he tries to choose, although he or she sees very little chance, and there is still a sense of willpower. But in a naturalistic play, there is not any more a black or white, but always gray character, and also round, not flat, as in the melodrama. Because in melodrama, since the characters are flat, they cannot change. But in naturalist works, they can change because they are round characters. And the characters and their efforts are highly appreciated. Well, I don't know whether I should start talking about, because we have some time to cover about the ghosts, since your friends are going to. Let me give you general information about ghosts uh, without trying to interfere into your friend's presentation. Um, Ibsen was a Norwegian playwright who was born in 1828 and died in 1906, beginning of the 20th century, and he lived mostly in 19th century, of course. The dates are very important about the moderns. So the time that this work was written, Ghosts, is 1881, because actually it gives the exact time when this kind of new drama or modern drama started. Among the early realists, he was the one who lived longest. He lived for 78 years. His father was a prosperous merchant, but poverty interrupted in Ibsen's youth. He married in 1858 at the age of 30, and he traveled to Italy and Germany. In his works, we can see the Norwegian traditions and myths dominated his play. He was a romantic playwright at the beginning, but became a realist after writing A Doll's House, his very famous work. After Ghosts and Enemy of the People, I don't know whether you have read the second one. That one is also a very prominent work. If you haven't, I advise you to go and read it. In plays, he uses a certain kind of imagism and the use of the images to dramatic imagery um, to intensify the portrayal of his characters. In one of his works, Wild Dog, in Hedda Gabler, he uses images, not symbols, as the critics sometimes say. He became famous in Europe more than his country, Norway, and because he was against the petite bourgeoisie, his ideas resemble the 18th century England and the capitalism. We can divide his period of, actually the periods of his work. The one before 1875, he mostly wrote romantic plays. After 1875, he moves into the social realist plays, and in 1892, he becomes most introspective in one of his work called Master Builder, published in 1892, and his attitude is trying to balance spiritual and material life, and becomes much more personal and uses more and more imagery in his plays. He was a very ambitious man. In Master Builder, he writes about an architect who tries to build the highest building in the town and finally falls down from it. The Wild Dog and Hodder Gabler are transitional plays between his social problem plays and introspective period, which include characters from the both types. In spite of realism, he uses some melodramatic elements as well in his works. Ibsen was never in England, so we cannot say his drama was Victorian. Actually, it was George Bernard Shaw, as we have discussed before, who imitated Ibsen's work and actually introduced Ibsen's work into English audience. Ibsen directed his plays against the conservative society, facade, manipulation of the society by false morality, and he tries to change the traditions. And he tried to show the conflict between the codes of the past and the present freedom of the present. This is different from being traditional, because he moves into a new path. This is another problem. No nostalgia, but realist approach to codes of the past as false morality and conservatism. So it is not referring to the past, does not show that he is nostalgic about it, but he actually tried to show that they are wrong. In his plays, the idea of power, status, role of the sexes actually get importance in Ibsen's work. The role of the sexes about the same time that women are doing things in the society. They're trying to get their rights. Relationship within the family stands as a microcosm. Why microcosm? I think you are quite familiar with the movement or a school called Transcendentalism, which is an American movement. It is somehow philosophical, literal, social, uh, religious movement started by um, Emerson, Thoreau, and Kohler in United States. One of their beliefs is that every part and particle that exists in the world is a part of a greater whole, which makes the whole universe and God. So the family and the parts who live in the family, the member of the family, their relationship, the way they live, is a microcosm of the greater society. So if you are studying a family, you are studying the same society that they are living in, what they think, what they do, what they decide, how, what kind of relationship they have. He is considering or concentrating on individuals, and through the destiny of these individuals, he explains the social problems. Ibsen was most of the time criticized by putting too much of his own, but he answers that he is using objective and critical realism as termed by Lukács, Georg Lukács, the very famous uh, Marxist critic, Hungarian Marxist critic. He observes and writes his plays. For example, in Ghosts, conscience becomes representation of social repressed forces, where the main character, she wants to build an orphanage. Okay, these are how, and he used drama to human behavior and improve mankind. Very good. He discusses the societal problems of role of women relative to men, the need, acceptance, and substance and quality. Of course, yes, very good. Yes, very good representation of the quality of Ibsen's works. Now about ghosts, we will leave talking about ghosts and criticizing. We'll do it next time. Now here we have another 10 minutes left. So let me go back to the text that we were actually covering from the next week, talking about the nature of the modern theater and this kind of things, uh, and modern drama. When we came to realism, naturalism, and symbolism, the 2 decades from 1880 to 1900, at the time of the fond de siècle, are astonishing, not just for the new about drama and the radical changes in theater practice and playwriting, but for the pace of those developments. More changes and upheavals are packed into these 20 years than perhaps any other periods of the modern drama. Very few people originally saw some of the plays we now consider worth studying, like George Bernard Shaw's uh, Widowers' Houses, which exposed the problem of slum landlords in London in 1892. The play was given its premiere by the Independent Theatre, formed in part of to get around the stage censorship before a tiny audience. In the same year, Charlie's Aunt, an entertaining romp that hardly anyone nowadays reads or even go to see, enjoyed a run of nearly 1,500 performances. To put this in perspective, 100 performances is about the length of a respectable run. In a short introduction to modern drama, it is impossible to give equal attention to both kinds of plays, and such histories tend to favor the progressive and subversive over the popular and merely entertaining. But it is worth hearing in mind that for each play under discussion, there were dozens of plays like Charlie's Aunt. One of the unique features of modern drama is that of the key performances took place in the inauspicious or ephemeral circumstances, great reckoning in small rooms. As director and scholar Herbert Blow reminds us that have taken on canonical status. Playwright and actress Elizabeth Robbins recalled seeing the poverty-struck premiere of A Doll's House in London in 1889 with its little-known actors in a pooky, tiny theatre and sparse, rather dingy audiences. For her, this made it less like a play than like a personal meeting with people and issues that seized us and helped us and wouldn't let us go. It is a paradox of theater history that many of the plays we now regarded as pioneering were at first fleeting and precarious affairs, and that in many cases performances preceded text. If we want to talk about Ibsen and the drama of the everyday life, can say that to convey the dregs and the sediments of human nature, Ibsen turned not just to prose, but the prosaic and the ordinary language or performance. From the Pillars of Society, published in 1877, onwards, he used everyday language to create dialogue that sounds ordinary but contains deep psychological nuances. Characters hesitate, interpret one another, and also interrupt each other, fail to finish their thoughts, and rarely use long speeches or soliloquies, as we could see in the classical works, or even in the works of Shakespeare, which are considered to be modern. No more of this kind of plays. What happens to ordinary people when they have speeches? Exactly the same thing is represented on the stage, but they are profound and fully fleshed out in ways that belie the superficial simplicity of their language. Mrs. Alving, for example, is one of these plays. You are a very guilty mother, says Pastor Anders in Act 1 of Ghosts. After a silence, he replies slowly and with control according to the stage directions. Remember, we did this in the previous session. And also we talked about naturalism in the theater. Zola insisted that modern theater should take its inspiration from the increasingly scientific context of the 19th century Europe. Darwin's On the Origin of Species, published in 1859, that we have discussed a few minutes ago, and especially The Descent of Man in 1871, opened up new possibilities for art to explore the relationship of humans to their environment as well as to each other. How far are we shaped by our environment, which we can usually be sometimes or something about, and how far it is heredity that determines who we are and which we can't do anything about. Today, we would call this debate nature versus nurture, as we have discussed in the previous session. One of the concepts, I wanted to talk about the comic relief and its effect on the theater of the time, alongside with the censorship and shock controversy and retreat. But since we are reaching to end of the time of the class, I have to stop here, and I'm not going to continue it because it will be left in the middle and it is not good. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for your class presence and participation. I'm afraid we could not have our presentation by our friends. Maybe next week Zahra's feels better and can take part in the presentation alongside with Ebtihaj and Mortada. So first, if we had a chance to have a good microphones, we will go through Ibsen and then to Strindberg. We will move to Strindberg Father, okay? Which is going to be presented by Samra and Ebtisam. Till next week, I wish you all the best, health, wealth, and also please take care of yourselves perfectly in this very dangerous time of Corona, and have a very good week ahead. Take care and goodbye.